What's up, guys? This is Kephas.
Welcome to SBA Spotlight. In these videos, I'll be covering how well the single button assistant performs for each spec, what it does well, where it falls short, and how to get the most out of it, especially if you're looking for a lower stress or more accessible way to play. So whether you're here to relax, overcome a limitation, or just see how far one button can take you, I've got you covered. Alright, so let's talk about the single button assistant and how it's working out for Havoc Demon Hunters, and the short answer is not too well, but as always, let's start off with how it's performing. According to Wowhead, they're estimating about 75% of optimal DPS potential on a target dummy. So damage wise, that might sound bad, but honestly, it's a lot better than you might think, and it's fairly par for the course, especially with melee classes using the single button assistant. So the damage really isn't the most concerning thing. What's more concerning is that there are a number of important abilities that the single button assistant will not use, so it's not going to cover your full rotation. But let's start with the positives and look at what the single button assistant will actually do. Put simply, the single button assistant is going to cover your core damage rotation. So obviously it's going to generate Fury with Demon's Bite if you have it, but let's be honest, most of us are just using Demon Blades anyway. It'll also use Immolation Aura, Throw Glaive, which would also include Reaper's Glaive if you're an Aldrachi Reaver, and it will also use Sigil of Flame and Sigil of Spite if you've chosen them as talents, and since they're ground targeting abilities, it will be able to place them under the feet of your target. Beyond that, it will spend your Fury, prioritizing Eye Beam and Blade Dance over Chaos Strike, and it will also use Essence Break if you choose that as a talent. And that pretty much covers everything that this single button assistant is going to use, most of which involves your core DPS rotation. The good news is that your single target and AoE rotations are pretty much the exact same thing, so performance stays more or less consistent. Most of what the single button assistant doesn't cover are movement abilities. Fell Rush, Vengeful Retreat, The Hunt, and even Fell Blade. Most of this is unsurprising, especially abilities like Fell Rush, Vengeful Retreat. They don't require targets and they do move your character around. They're often used primarily as ways to get around. Even the Hunt is unsurprising. It's a longer cooldown ability, it has a pretty big range, and it's mainly there to move you into battle. But Fell Blade is unfortunate. Even though it is a movement ability, I feel like it's more often used as just a way to generate more Fury, so I kind of wish they would add it, especially because it has such a short cooldown, so that one's kind of on the line. But what's most surprising is that the single button assistant won't use Glaive Tempest or Fell Barrage either. Why these aren't included in the single button assistant, I have no idea. Both of them use Fury, and that's going to make it really hard to use them if you're going to use the tool, even if you try to manage them separately. I've seen single button assistant use similar abilities with other classes, so I don't know why they're not included here. So in my opinion, the best way to handle these abilities is simply by not taking them. I would recommend, if you're going to use the single button assistant, to avoid Glaive Tempest and Fell Barrage altogether. I would also advise against going with high mobility builds using talents like Inertia. Personally, I've been using Wowhead's low mover Mythic Plus builds, and those seem to work a lot better with the single button assistant. Now, you obviously can still use Fell Rush and Vengeful Retreat, you're just going to have to use them on separate buttons, and by default you can do the same with The Hunt and Fell Blade. Of course, the last major ability that the single button assistant won't use is your main offensive cooldown, Metamorphosis. So unfortunately, you're going to have a number of abilities that you're going to have to manage on separate buttons. You could also try the GSE add-on. This would allow you to make a sequence where you'd use the single button assistant along with these other abilities with just one button. I've gone ahead and created this sequence, which I will have linked in the description below, and what this will do is it will use the single button assistant to cover your core rotation, and then it will also occasionally try to use Fell Blade along with the Hunt and Metamorphosis. Since Metamorphosis is a ground targeting ability, I have it set with an @player conditional, meaning it will simply use Metamorphosis right where you're standing. Simply import it into the GSE add-on, hotkey it, and you'll essentially be able to do your entire rotation with one button. However you choose to handle this is entirely up to you, but even if you don't use GSE, I highly recommend creating a default macro with the single button assistant and add the no channeling conditional. Because if the single button assistant uses I-beam, which is a channeled ability, and you press the button again, it will interrupt your I-beam. The no channeling conditional will prevent this, so I've gone ahead and also added a default macro in the description. You can copy and paste it into the game. It will have this conditional, and it will also include any unused trinkets that you might have and use those on cooldown as well. So overall, this is probably one of the least user-friendly SBAs I've seen so far. If the goal is accessibility, then Blizzard has a long way to go to improve this one. There are a lot of abilities that the tool doesn't use, which not only limits your build, but makes the tool feel unintuitive. However, it does a pretty decent job of covering your core rotation, and the damage is acceptable for what it is. So while it's not perfect, it will simplify things, it does fairly decent damage, and once you've got a handle on how to manage everything, it's really not so bad. And that's pretty much everything I've learned for now, but as always, I'd love to hear from you. What do you think of the single button assistant, and how is it working out for you so far? Let me know in the comments. But with all that being said, I will see you guys on the next one.
Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, let me know by clicking that like button. And feel free to share it with your friends so they can enjoy it as well. And if you'd like to see more videos, you can subscribe to the channel and click on the bell icon to be notified as soon as new videos are posted. You can also follow me on Facebook, and if you like, you can support my work on Patreon. Links to all that stuff can be found in the description below. This is Kephas. Until next time.